Now, when banks develop their strategy and all their techniques for combating fraud, they do probably, I reckon, the vast majority of it in-house. But I also understand that they also need to go externally and get the advice of external consultants and use external IT, specialist IT vendors. When would you say a bank needs to start to look outside for external help, and how important is that these days?
Yeah, well, I think we're never going to tell the bank their business, right? I mean, they know the business better than we do. But I think where it becomes very important for financial services to reach outside is with some of the new areas of technology, such as predictive analytics, such as centralizing the new data architects to help with in the centralization of data. I think also what we're seeing is that we bring a lot of experience to the table that we see multiple financial services institutions, and each of them are solving it in a slightly different way. And that aggregated knowledge allows us to bring, help accelerate what organizations are doing to try and detect fraud in that area. And so we're seeing everything from help me with my strategy, through how do I get a global view of my scenarios that are out there, how do I install or implement new predictive analytic technology, how do we do better trade surveillance, how do we do better broker compliance, and so not only from a strategic standpoint, but also then how do we design that program and how do we implement it and make it operational. I mean, at the end of the day, it needs to be operational, it needs to be able to be maintainable and provide the right level of detail to the right level of people.
So when you develop an anti-fraud strategy for a bank, how do you go about it? Do you have a step-by-step process? Could you just take
Sure,
me through
we do.
that?
We have about a 5-step process that we've been using, and I think the first piece, which we've learned over time, is that we start doing a business risk assessment. And within that business risk assessment, we really begin to look at, what are my loss events and what are the root causes of those loss events. And then based on that, we look at then what are my critical assets and what are the threats surrounding that. Secondly, after we've defined and understand what those threats are, we look at what type of strategy I should be using in my surveillance piece. What data do I have access to? How can I aggregate that? How do I report on that? What types of case management systems do I need in place? What's the process I need to be doing from a case management perspective? Thirdly, from there we then implement and work with organizations to deploy fraud surveillance engines. Fourth, then we work with the organizations to understand what those processes are. Those processes are currently effective, and if not, then we help work with redesigning those or redeploying those processes. And finally, we look at, again, this needs to be an iterative process, so we have a monitoring process that we end up putting in place and work with institutions to really see, am I following the right KRIs, am I getting the right KPIs, key risk indicators and key performance indicators, and is my program tracking appropriately, and am I following the right information? And as I get more and more mature through that process, my risk indicators get tighter and tighter, and I'm able to really track fraud much more efficiently.
Now, the public tends to think of banking fraud as being something that affects mainly retail accounts, because the general public, that's how it affects them. And I believe that retail accounts are generally more susceptible to fraud, but increasingly there's a growing trend, I believe, for commercial bank accounts to be targeted. Am I correct in that? Is that a new trend, and if so, why is it happening?
Sure, we are seeing more and more commercial fraud accounts being affected, and I think part of the reason for that is just that there's more turnover in the number of transactions that are taking place. So it's easier to lose yourself within that piece, and the fraudsters we're seeing are becoming much more and more patient, and they're looking for the larger scores and buyouts. And so in the retail side, it is a volume business. And so they have to do a lot of smaller and smaller transactions to add for the numbers. And I think in the commercial accounts, they can really get that volume in a much faster period of time.
And staff fraud, that's a big problem. Fraud is committed by dishonest employees, it's committed by customers, it's committed by outsiders targeting the bank. But on staff fraud, the biggest threat to a bank in terms of total value is staff carrying out rogue trades, unauthorized trades, rogue trading. What can banks do to prevent rogue traders?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I think it all comes down to supervision, and I think that there are many pre-trade surveillance systems and post-trade surveillance systems out there. But what has been missing is again filling in the details in between that. And so, what is the activity of that person? What systems do they have access to? Understanding their HR profile and where they've been in the past. I think what we've seen within Credit Suisse and that piece is we've done some research and some analysis on that. That gentleman had experience both in the back office and the front office, so he was able to know how to do a trade and then roll it back before somebody else saw that in a very quick period of time. So understanding where people have been within your organization, understanding on what they're doing on a daily basis. So for instance, if you're looking at a particular P&L, is that a flat P&L? Do we have highs and lows? Each of these things will begin to trigger off what normal behavior is, or even what questionable behavior is. And so you need to, again, pull in non-traditional fraud information to understand what that activity of those individuals are. And some of that individual activity may be legitimate, but it's good to know about that, and the earlier that you catch that in day 3 versus 300, it will be much better.
Yeah.